got a fun one today. We're talking about Morbius a little bit because I just got back from the screening not that long ago, so kind of giving my initial thoughts. This could end up being a long one, so I apologize for that, but I have a lot on my mind after seeing the film, so I'm not even really sure if I want to call this a review or just a reaction. Where do we even start when it comes to this universe that Sony is cobbling together with all these different Marvel Spider-Man characters? After over half a dozen delays and seeing the trailer for Morbius put in front of so many movies over the years, I really felt like this film was just never going to actually ever come out. As a collective, with the film finally releasing in theaters this week, I think we all deserve a shot to kind of pour one out because we're finally not going to see the Morbius trailer in theaters ever again.
I will remember you.
Actually using my Betty White shot glass, R.I.P. Betty White. It's difficult to describe my expectations going into Morbius, all of the delays aside. Morbius as a character has never really appealed to me as a character that could lead an entire film on his own, and that's coming from someone who reads the comic books, who's been a lifelong Spider-Man fan. Venom, I can kind of understand the appeal to have him lead a solo film because he does have that popularity and a lot of source material as a character, even if you do ignore all of the connections to Spider-Man. Morbius, not really as much. I definitely think that Morbius is a very interesting Spider-Man villain. I don't think he's like top tier or anything. I don't think he's a Marvel legend like a lot of the ad campaign has been trying to hype him up. And after seeing the film, I think it does continue to solidify my opinion in that right. I really don't think he should have gotten a solo film. Plotting all around for Morbius isn't particularly interesting in any regard. Part of that possibly could be to the fact that I've seen the trailers for the film about 500,000 times. But even still, that knowledge of those trailers, nothing really is anything that I haven't seen before. It's your typical super standard formulaic film from start to finish and how we execute an origin story. We all know that most comic book films follow some form of formula, whether it be the MCU, the DCU, everything in between. There's usually something there. While some of them do feel kind of samey, there's usually stuff in there that at least is somewhat interesting to follow along with, and there's just not much of that in Morbius. I would find it kind of particularly dull in some portions of the film. The journey that we go on with Michael Morbius from start to finish, you know, him becoming the living vampire and the problems that arise with the antagonist trying to stop him, it feels very old school, but not in the good kind of way. You know, like back in the early 2000s when we had the boom of the comic book movie with Spider-Man, X-Men, all that stuff, it feels similar in that regard, but not in like a good way. You know, for every comic book movie that was good back then, there were others that didn't really understand the formula, it hadn't been cracked just yet. So I would probably lump this more into the Catwoman, the Elektra, the Daredevil, the Ben Affleck one, all that stuff. It just feels very generic. It's nothing unique. There's nothing fresh about it. We've seen this played out and it feels dated. That doesn't mean there isn't some entertainment value to Morbius. The film does try to do something interesting and have some visual flair to the scenes that kind of incorporate comic book movie elements. There are some parts that I actually did enjoy. For example, Morbius is kind of a dark, scary character at times, and we do have some little bits of horror in the film. I wish there was more of that horror aesthetic all throughout the film. It's kind of the same criticism I have with some of the Venom films and how they kind of definitely cater more towards a younger audience. I mean, it is PG-13 after all. With a character like Morbius, I think you could do a lot more with an R rating, but it's totally acceptable to do a PG-13 rating here, but I think that they kind of held back a bit, even with a PG-13 rating, as the film does shy away a bit from showing anything too bloody in any circumstance. I will say, I do think the film all around is kind of messy, but I do think a lot of that is because of the script that's involved. I actually found most of the performances in the film to be pretty solid all around. There's not really too many weak links in the cast. You can see everyone trying to give it their all with their performances, but the script itself, it's just super disjointed and borderline incoherent at certain points. But in a different setting entirely, I think that all these characters probably could work, especially Jared Leto as Michael Morbius. Not that I consider myself a big fan of Jared Leto or anything these days, but I do think he does embody the character of Michael Morbius pretty well. It does feel like he completely understands the character of Michael Morbius and the duality of him having to deal with everything in the film that comes with changing into the living vampire and having all these different strange superhero abilities. It'll be very intriguing if he does ever inevitably face off against Spider-Man. I'm not really sure how that's going to work, and I don't think even this film knows how it's going to work, but we'll get to that eventually, because that is one of my major gripes about the film. All the other major cast members are solid here as well. Adria Arjona, Tyrese, Jared Harris. The best of the bunch for me probably was Matt Smith as the antagonist, Loxias Crown. Very much hamming it up here. You could tell he was having the best time out of everyone in the cast. It could potentially be some of my bias as a massive fan of Doctor Who in the past, especially when Matt Smith was the Doctor, but he was great. In a film that wasn't really that great, he was one of the more entertaining elements here. I also just seems like a lot of these people who play the Doctor end up being villains in a Marvel or DC project. Christopher Eccleston, David Tennant, Matt Smith, all Marvel villains. Peter Capaldi was a villain in DC for the Suicide Squad, so I guess we kind of are just waiting now for Jodie Whittaker to be some sort of Marvel or DC villain. You know, she's next up. Now, I've never been someone that likes to harp on bad CGI, because I do know the people that work in that department, they work very hard, but I don't know what was going on here with the CGI in Morbius, because all around it just felt very messy, which is weird because with all of the different delays in this film, you figured that they would have some very polished CGI because you've had so much extra time to work on it. I don't know if that was the case, or Sony didn't feel like putting any more money in the project after all of the delays, but the CGI, most of the time, just not very good. It does not look good. A lot of the time that it looks the worst probably is unfortunately in the big action set pieces, because it just looks like something out of the early to mid 2000s. You had an excuse then because it was the early 2000s. You don't really have as much of an excuse now for the bad CGI. I think that some of the CGI they used to make Morbius look like the living vampire was kind of well done in some cases, but all around just a very weirdly messy CGI film to kind of go along with the rest of the film being very messy and disjointed. As we all know, Sony is trying their hardest to try and have a connected universe with the MCU. We saw it at the end credits scene for Let There Be Carnage, and also in No Way Home, even though Venom went away in No Way Home, so it's kind of a moot point already. Even in the promotional material leading up to Morbius, we've seen stuff with Raimi's Spider-Man, the Oscorp building from Amazing Spider-Man, and the fact that he says he's Venom in the trailer. So what the hell universe is going on in this film? And I think that this film, especially the ending, the post-credits scene, it is awful. It makes that whole entire situation even more confusing and incoherent. It's frustrating. I felt like I got clickbaited by a movie. I don't want to give too much away in case people don't know that going in, but don't expect to see a lot of that stuff, also including the Michael Keaton Vulture stuff. You thought that Morbius was probably going to clear up some of the connections, but like I said, it just makes everything worse. It is so frustrating that they just are trying so hard to make a universe, but they seem to have no idea how to actually connect it to anything. And one party doesn't really want to connect either, so it's a very weirdly one-sided relationship when it comes to a shared universe. All around, Morbius was kind of more or less what I expected going in. It's not going to be a great comic book film by any means. There are some fun bits to be had here. Maybe if you like the Venom films, both 1 and 2, you might like some of the stuff in here, but I think if you're more mixed on the films as a whole, you're not going to like this that much. It's just a very messy film all around. I do think that probably this is the worst out of those 3 films between the 2 Venom films and Morbius. Just me personally, I don't know if when we're gonna see these characters again. I don't know if we're gonna get a Morbius 2 or he's gonna be in the MCU. Who knows what they're trying to do with this universe? It's very confusing. I don't know where we're going to go with the universe after this. I mean, whatever at this point. Like, we'll see where it goes. We'll see if Sony has an idea where they want to go after this either. Anyway, now that you've heard my thoughts on Morbius, make sure you share your thoughts down below. What did you think of the film when you get a chance to check out the film? Did you like the film? Not like the film? Are you looking forward to Morbius in any way? I feel like a lot of people aren't, but I feel like there has to be some sort of massive Morbius fan base out there if they're going to give him a solo film, right? As always, thank you guys so much for checking out the reviews. I really appreciate that. Make sure to like on the video. Also, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Strip movie restrictions, unboxings, and more. But next time, I'll see you guys later.